General Hospital will reveal Sidwell has turned Marco into a pawn in his game of revenge against Natalia. After their failed marriage, he nurtured a deep hatred, and instead of directly attacking his ex-wife, Sidwell chose a more subtle approach, using their own son as a tool to destroy her life. From the time Marco was young, Sidwell manipulated his son psychologically, convincing him that Natalia had abandoned them and never truly loved him. These lies created a deep rift between Natalia and her son, causing Marco to always keep his distance and even resent his mother. In recent days, Port Charles has been immersed in dark conspiracies and secrets as the relationship between Sidwell, Natalia, and their son, Marco, is gradually revealed. The story began with a tense confrontation between Sonny and Natalia last week, when Sonny discovered the connection between Natalia and his new enemy, Jen Sidwell. Although Jason had affirmed that Sidwell was not involved in the explosion at Sonny's penthouse, Sonny still couldn't trust it. With the keen instinct of a mafia boss, Sonny interrogated Natalia after catching her talking to Sidwell. Under pressure, Natalia was forced to admit that Sidwell was her ex-husband, but she insisted it was a brief marriage and the only good thing that came from that relationship was their son, Marco. The feud between Sidwell and Natalia originated many years ago, when their marriage ended bitterly. Sidwell, a powerful and arrogant man, could never accept rejection. Natalia left him after discovering the true nature of her husband, a manipulative, controlling, and cruel person. She had tried to take Marco with her, but Sidwell, with his power and money, succeeded in gaining custody. This was the beginning of Sidwell's decades-long revenge plan. Throughout the years as Marco grew up, Sidwell wove a complex story about how Natalia had abandoned both men in her life. He portrayed Natalia as a selfish woman, only concerned with herself and her career, with no real love for her son. Each time Natalia tried to contact Marco, Sidwell found ways to prevent it or distort her intentions. The letters, gifts, and efforts of Natalia were all intercepted by Sidwell or presented in a way that made Marco believe his mother was only trying to ease her conscience. Marco grew up in the shadow of hatred and resentment. He inherited his charming appearance and sharp intelligence from both his father and mother, but his soul had been molded by Sidwell according to his wishes. From a young age, Marco was taught that emotions were a sign of weakness, and loyalty to family, especially to his father, was the most important thing. Sidwell had turned Marco into a younger version of himself. Cold, calculating, and always putting goals above everything else. Despite having innate musical talent, Marco was directed by Sidwell into the path of law. He convinced his son that art was just a hobby, not a career for a real man. Sidwell needed Marco to become a lawyer not only to serve his shady business activities but also because it was part of his plan to revenge Natalia. He knew that Natalia always wanted her son to pursue his passion for music, and turning Marco into a cold-blooded lawyer was Sidwell's way of trampling on her dreams. When Marco graduated from law school with outstanding achievements, Sidwell implemented the next step in his plan. He sent Marco to Port Charles with a clear mission: infiltrate Natalia's life, gather information about her relationships, and gradually destroy everything she had built. Marco, still believing the story of the cruel mother who had abandoned him, was ready to carry out this mission. Marco's application to work at Diane and Alexis's law firm was no coincidence. Sidwell knew that this firm had connections with Sonny Corinthos, who was having a close relationship with Natalia. Marco used his charm and intelligence to quickly get hired. He began gathering information about Sonny, Natalia, and their network of relationships, reporting back to Sidwell every detail. At the same time, Marco also began a relationship with Lucas Jones. Initially, this was just part of the mission, as Lucas had connections to Sonny through Carly and to Alexis through Julian and Sam. Marco had calculated that through Lucas, he could access more inside information. However, what was not in the plan was that Marco gradually developed genuine feelings for Lucas. Lucas, with his sincere character and kindness, touched a part of Marco that Sidwell could never fully control: the ability to love. For the first time in his life, Marco experienced real love, not manipulation or conditions like the father-son relationship between him and Sidwell. This created an internal battle within Marco, between loyalty to his father and his newly emerging love. Meanwhile, Natalia had no idea that her son was in Port Charles with malicious intent. When she discovered that Marco was living and working in the city, she was extremely moved and tried to approach him. However, Marco always maintained a cold and distant attitude. During a rare lunch between mother and son, Natalia expressed her disappointment at seeing Marco pursue a career in law instead of developing his musical talent. She didn't know that each of her words was interpreted by Marco through the distorted lens that Sidwell had created. Natalia began to suspect something was wrong when she noticed Marco was too close to people in her social circle. She sensed the anger and resentment in her son's eyes whenever they met, but didn't understand why. Only when she accidentally caught Marco talking on the phone with Sidwell did Natalia begin to understand the frightening truth: her son was a tool in her ex-husband's revenge plan. Meanwhile, Sonny with his keen instinct had begun to suspect Marco. He noticed there were too many coincidences in Marco's appearance in Port Charles right after Sidwell. Sonny had secretly investigated Marco and discovered the connection between him and Sidwell. The confrontation between Sonny, Diane, and Marco was the result of this investigation. When Sonny directly exposed Marco's true identity, he didn't expect that he was pushing the situation into a dangerous turn. Marco, cornered, was forced to admit his relationship with Sidwell, but still kept silent about his true purpose in Port Charles. This exposure made Marco even more determined to complete his mission quickly, before Sonny could stop him. Sidwell, upon learning that Marco had been exposed, changed his plan. He asked Marco to speed up the progress and begin the final phase of the revenge plan, destroying Natalia's reputation and career. Sidwell had prepared forged documents, showing that Natalia had been involved in illegal activities, and asked Marco to use his position as a lawyer to introduce these documents into the legal system. However, Marco was gradually realizing the truth. Through time spent with Natalia and those around her, he began to see a different image of his mother, not the selfish and cruel woman Sidwell had described, but a loving mother who had to fight to escape a toxic marriage. His relationship with Lucas also made Marco reconsider the values that Sidwell had taught him. He began to wonder if he was on the right path. By chance, Marco discovered a box of old letters in Natalia's apartment. Letters she had written to him over the years, but never sent because she knew Sidwell would intercept them. Reading these letters, Marco completely collapsed. He realized that he had been deceived by Sidwell all his life. Natalia had never abandoned him, she had always tried to contact and express her love, but Sidwell had prevented all her efforts. With a painful heart and confused mind, Marco stood at a crossroads. He had to choose between continuing Sidwell's revenge plan, completing the mission he had spent his whole life preparing for, or facing the truth that he had been deceived and manipulated by the very father he revered. This decision not only affected his future but also determined the fate of Natalia, Lucas, and everyone involved. Meanwhile, Natalia, having realized Sidwell's plot, began looking for ways to protect herself and save her son from her ex-husband's control. She knew that Sidwell would not stop until he achieved his goal, and Marco might be the one to pay the highest price in this battle. With Sonny's help, Natalia began gathering evidence of Sidwell's illegal activities, hoping to use them to force him to stop. Sonny, although no longer trusting Natalia after discovering her connection to Sidwell, still decided to help her. He realized that Marco was also a victim in Sidwell's plot, and perhaps there was still a chance to save him. Sonny had secretly contacted Jason, asking him to investigate deeper into Sidwell's past and his relationship with Natalia and Marco. Lucas, unaware of Marco's true identity and his purpose in Port Charles, continued to develop his relationship with him. Lucas's love was the only real thing in Marco's life at this point, and also what gradually changed him. Lucas, with his kind heart and sincerity, had unwittingly become the key that could free Marco from Sidwell's control. As all secrets were gradually revealed and the characters moved like chess pieces on the board of fate, Port Charles became a battlefield for the war between love and hatred, between truth and lies. Sidwell, with his bitter hatred, had succeeded in turning his son into a tool of revenge, but could he control the final outcome? Would Marco have enough strength to escape his father's shadow and find his true self? And could Natalia restore her relationship with her son, or was it too late to heal the wounds of the past? The answers to these questions will be revealed in the coming days in Port Charles, as the battle between Sidwell and Natalia reaches its climax, and Marco must make the most important decision of his life. Sidwell has turned Marco into a pawn in his game of revenge against Natalia. After their failed marriage, he nurtured a deep hatred, and instead of directly attacking his ex-wife, Sidwell chose a more subtle approach, using their own son as a tool to destroy her life. From the time Marco was young, Sidwell manipulated his son psychologically, convincing him that Natalia had abandoned them and never truly loved him. These lies created a deep rift between Natalia and her son, causing Marco to always keep his distance and even resent his mother. In recent days, Port Charles has been immersed in dark conspiracies and secrets as the relationship between Sidwell, Natalia, and their son, Marco, is gradually revealed. The story began with a tense confrontation between Sonny and Natalia last week, when Sonny discovered the connection between Natalia and his new enemy, Jen Sidwell. Although Jason had affirmed that Sidwell was not involved in the explosion at Sonny's penthouse, Sonny still couldn't trust it. Sonny, who always puts trust and loyalty above all else, decided to end his relationship with Natalia. For Sonny, it was unacceptable that someone in his inner circle would conceal a connection with a potential enemy. The betrayal cut deep, as Sonny had begun to develop genuine feelings for Natalia. Despite her explanations, Sonny remained firm in his decision, believing that in his dangerous world, divided loyalties could be fatal. Meanwhile, Marco had appeared in Port Charles and quickly established his position. He not only applied for a job at Diane and Alexis's law firm but also began a romantic relationship with Lucas. All of these seemed too coincidental to be random. Marco's arrival was meticulously planned, each move calculated to infiltrate the town's social fabric. His impressive resume and charming demeanor made him an instant hit at the law firm, where he quickly gained access to sensitive information. During a rare lunch with her son, Natalia expressed disappointment that Marco was wasting his talent on being a lawyer. Unlike most mothers who would be proud of their child having a stable career, Natalia believed Marco was better suited for the entertainment industry. She also revealed that it was Sidwell who had pushed Marco to pursue law to serve his shady activities. This lunch was tense and uncomfortable, with Marco maintaining his emotional distance despite Natalia's attempts to reconnect. The truth about Marco gradually came to light when Sonny, Diane, and Marco had an unexpected meeting. Diane's shocked face said it all when Sonny looked directly at Marco and declared, "Jen Sidwell. That's your father, isn't it?" Marco was not happy about being exposed, but he couldn't deny the truth. This confrontation occurred in Diane's office, where Marco had been working for several weeks, and suddenly the carefully constructed facade began to crumble. When Marco grew up, Sidwell pushed him into becoming a lawyer, not because it was Marco's passion, but because Sidwell needed someone in the legal system to carry out his schemes. Marco, with his innate musical talent, had to abandon his dream of becoming a musician to please the father he revered. Marco's legal education was prestigious and thorough, making him not just a well-trained lawyer but a specifically crafted legal weapon designed to navigate the complexities of the legal system in service to his father's interests. Marco's appearance in Port Charles, working at Diane and Alexis's law firm, and beginning a relationship with Lucas, all were part of Sidwell's plan. The ultimate goal wasn't just to gather information about Sonny or trap Alexis, but also for Marco to approach Natalia, weaken her position in Port Charles, and finally destroy the life she had built. The plan had been in development for years, waiting for the right moment to be set in motion. What's notable is that Marco wasn't fully aware that he was being used by his father. He believed he was helping his father achieve justice, that Natalia deserved to pay for what she had done. However, behind his cold and determined exterior, Marco still had doubts and internal conflicts. A part of him still yearned for maternal love and acceptance from Natalia. His relationship with Lucas further complicated matters, as he began to develop genuine feelings that conflicted with his mission. Meanwhile, Natalia had realized Sidwell's plot. She knew Marco was being manipulated, but didn't know how to approach her son. Every time she tried to talk to Marco, she was met with rejection or cold treatment. Natalia painfully realized that Sidwell had succeeded in turning their son into a weapon against her. Despite these rejections, Natalia refused to give up, gathering evidence of Sidwell's manipulation in hopes of eventually showing Marco the truth about his father's deception.